Dad, was this important?
Every saddle belonged to someone important.
Jacob Miller? My father died last month.
Nobody could survive that.
Help!
Leave! You can't save me. Then we die trying. If I survive, I'll repay this. You remembered.
The day Eleanor Whitmore came to pay her father's debt, I thought she had the wrong man. By sunset, I realized I had spent 20 years trying to forget something that William Whitmore had never forgotten for a single day. It was an ordinary afternoon at my ranch. At least, it started that way. The Texas sun was beginning to drop behind the hills, and I was in my workshop repairing an old saddle that had seen better decades. Emma sat beside me on a wooden stool, carefully cleaning the silver details with a cloth. She loved old things, old saddles, old wagons, old stories. She always said old things mattered more because they had survived. I smiled every time she said it, because her mother used to say the same thing. "Dad," Emma asked, holding up one of the silver buckles, "do you think this saddle belonged to someone important?" I looked at the worn leather. Every saddle belonged to someone important. She smiled. I think she understood. The sound of tires crunching on gravel interrupted us. That alone was unusual. Almost nobody visited our ranch unexpectedly. I walked toward the door and stepped outside. A black pickup truck sat near the fence. Expensive. New. The kind of vehicle that cost more than everything inside my workshop. Then the driver's door opened, and Eleanor Whitmore stepped out. Everyone in Texas knew the Whitmore name. William Whitmore had built one of the greatest ranching empires in the country, and Eleanor had inherited all of it. For a second, I honestly believed she had come to the wrong address. Emma ran outside behind me. "Dad," she whispered, "is that really Eleanor Whitmore?" I nodded. I wasn't sure what else to do. Eleanor walked slowly toward us. She wasn't dressed like a billionaire. No assistants, no security, no lawyers, just jeans, boots, and an expression I'd seen only a few times in my life. Grief. Real grief. I removed my hat. "Miss Whitmore." She stopped a few feet away. "Jacob Miller?" "That's right." For a moment she simply looked at me, as if trying to determine whether I was the man she had spent weeks searching for. Then she spoke. "My father died last month." The words hit harder than I expected. William Whitmore. Gone. I lowered my head. "I'm sorry." She nodded. "Thank you." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The wind moved softly through the pasture behind us. Then she reached into her jacket. "Before he died," she said quietly, "he left me one final instruction." She held out an envelope, old, worn, yellowed by time. My hands froze before I even touched it, because somehow, before I opened it, I already knew. I carefully unfolded the paper. There was only one sentence written in William Whitmore's handwriting. "Find Jacob Miller. Pay what I owe him." I couldn't breathe. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. After all those years, I knew exactly what debt William Whitmore had spent the rest of his life trying to repay. The problem was, nobody else did. "My name is Jacob Miller. I'm 42 years old. I'm a cowboy, a father, a widower, and until Eleanor Whitmore arrived at my ranch carrying that old envelope, I believed some chapters of my life had been closed forever. I live on a small ranch outside town with my daughter, Emma. Calling it a ranch might actually be generous. It's a few acres of land, a weathered barn, a small workshop, and more repairs than I can ever seem to finish. Some mornings, I wake up already tired, not because of the work, because of the responsibility. When you're raising a child alone, every decision feels heavier, every dollar matters. Every mistake feels bigger. But then Emma smiles, and somehow everything becomes manageable again. Emma is 8 years old. She loves horses, not casually, completely. She names every horse she meets, talks to them, reads beside them, and somehow convinces them to behave better for her than they ever do for me. She also inherited something else from her mother, curiosity, the kind that makes her ask questions nobody else thinks to ask, the kind that makes her stop when everyone else keeps walking, the kind that changes lives. Sarah was exactly the same way. Before she died, she had a way of seeing things differently than everyone else. When people saw problems, she saw stories. When people saw mistakes, she saw lessons. And when people saw debts, she saw something else entirely. One evening, years before Emma was born, I remember complaining about a man who had never repaid money I had lent him. Sarah listened patiently. Then she smiled and said something I've never forgotten. A debt of kindness is never truly forgotten. I laughed. Honestly, I thought she was wrong. The world didn't work that way. People forgot. Life moved on. Good intentions disappeared. But Sarah only smiled. Not the important ones. For years after she died, I found myself repeating those words, especially during difficult times, especially when kindness seemed expensive, especially when nobody noticed. I tried to teach Emma the same lesson. Help people, do the right thing, expect nothing back, because kindness isn't a transaction, it's a choice. That's why I never regretted the decision I made 20 years earlier, even though it changed my life, even though it nearly ended it, and even though, for most of those 20 years, I believed William Whitmore had forgotten all about it. After all, why wouldn't he? He became one of the richest ranch owners in America. I became a struggling rancher trying to pay bills and raise a daughter. Our lives moved in opposite directions. I never wrote to him, never called, never expected anything. Not gratitude, not money, not recognition. The truth is, I didn't save William Whitmore because I wanted something. I saved him because leaving him there would have meant living with myself afterward. Sarah understood that. She always understood. And eventually, I convinced myself that William had probably forgotten that terrible night. Forgotten the storm, forgotten the accident, forgotten the promise he made. Honestly, I hoped he had. Because some memories are easier to carry when you're the only person carrying them. But then, Eleanor arrived. She stood in front of my workshop, holding an envelope that had traveled through 20 years of silence. And suddenly I realized something that shook me far more than the letter itself. William Whitmore hadn't forgotten, not for a single day, which meant that somewhere, during all those years while I was struggling to rebuild my life, raise Emma, and survive after losing Sarah, William Whitmore had been trying to find me, and I had no idea why. 20 years earlier, William Whitmore wasn't the most powerful ranch owner in Texas. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't famous. He was simply a rancher trying to keep his family's land alive. And I was just a young cowboy trying to survive. Back then, I was 22 years old. I had no money, no reputation, no experience worth talking about. Just a beat-up truck, a stubborn horse, and the belief that hard work could solve almost anything. I had never met William Whitmore, at least not officially. Everyone in the county knew his name. He had inherited a struggling ranch from his father and spent every waking hour trying to save it. People respected him, but respect doesn't protect you from bad luck. And that year, bad luck came in the form of a storm. I still remember that night. The sky had turned black hours before sunset. The wind arrived first, then the rain, then something worse. The radio warned everyone to stay indoors. Trees were falling, roads were disappearing under floodwater. Most people stayed home. I should have. Instead, I was driving back from a cattle auction when I saw something that changed both our lives. A truck, upside down, half buried beneath debris near a flooded section of road. At first, I almost kept driving, not because I didn't want to help, because I honestly believed nobody could have survived. Then I heard it, a voice, weak, almost impossible to hear beneath the storm. Help! I stopped. To this day, I don't know whether it was courage or stupidity. Probably both. The water was already rising. The truck had been crushed by a fallen tree. The driver's side was completely trapped. I climbed through mud, broken branches, and floodwater to reach the passenger side. Inside sat William Whitmore. His leg was pinned. Blood covered his shirt. He looked at me as though he couldn't believe another human being had actually stopped. "Leave," he said. "You can't get me out." I ignored him. He tried again. "The water's rising. You'll die too." Maybe he was right. But some decisions happen before you have time to think about them. I spent nearly an hour trying to free him. The rain never stopped. The truck shifted twice. At one point, I genuinely believed we were both going to die. Eventually, I managed to break enough of the frame apart to pull him free. I still remember carrying him through waist-deep water. I still remember his arm around my shoulder. I still remember how cold the storm felt. And I still remember what he said before he lost consciousness. "If I survive, I'll repay this." At the hospital, they took him away. Doctors, nurses, emergency crews. Nobody cared about the young cowboy covered in mud standing alone in the hallway. Honestly, neither did I. I went home, went back to work, and tried to forget about it. A few weeks later, William sent someone to find me. But by then I had already left town for seasonal ranch work. Then life happened. I got married. Sarah came into my life. Emma was born. William's ranch became an empire, and the years simply disappeared. I occasionally wondered what happened to him. Sometimes I even wondered whether he remembered that storm at all. Eventually, I convinced myself that he probably didn't. After all, powerful people move on. Ordinary people remember. At least that's what I believed. But I was wrong. Very wrong. Because as Eleanor sat across from me holding that old envelope, she revealed something that made my hands go cold. My name hadn't been forgotten. For 20 years, William Whitmore had searched for me. Private investigators, former employees, county records, old ranch registries. He never stopped looking, not because he owed me money, because he believed he owed me his life. But then Eleanor looked down at the envelope again, and quietly said something that changed everything. My father didn't leave just one debt behind. And suddenly I realized that the storm I survived 20 years earlier wasn't the only secret William Whitmore had spent his life trying to make right. When Eleanor told me that her father had left more than one debt behind, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Suspicion, the kind that used to keep me awake when I worked as a Texas Ranger, the kind that tells you a story isn't finished. She reached into the folder she had brought and removed several documents. Most were copies. Some were handwritten notes. Others were legal records. But one name appeared again and again. Victor Kane. I knew the name. Everyone in Texas did. Investor, businessman, owner of neighboring properties. A man who always seemed to appear wherever money and power crossed paths. What I didn't know was how long he had been involved with the Whitmore family. Eleanor looked exhausted. "After my father died," she said quietly, "I started reviewing old records. She handed me another document. My father had been searching for you for almost 20 years. I nodded slowly. That much I already knew. Then she handed me a second file, and someone spent nearly as long trying to stop him. I looked down. Private investigator reports, search requests, financial records, missing files, canceled contracts. The pattern became obvious almost immediately. Every time William Whitmore came close to finding me, something happened. A witness disappeared. A record went missing. A search ended abruptly. At first I didn't want to believe it. Then the Texas Ranger inside me started doing what he had always done, looking for patterns. I spent the next several days investigating. Not because anyone asked me to, because after 20 years, I deserved to know why William had never found me. The deeper I dug, the worse the truth became. Victor Kane had known about the debt. Not recently, for years. William had trusted him, brought him into business meetings, allowed him access to financial records, even shared parts of the story about the storm. That trust had been a mistake. Victor understood something William never fully accepted. A debt can become power, and power can become profit. According to old correspondence, Victor had repeatedly advised William to stop looking for me. He called it irrational, emotional, financially irresponsible, but William refused. So Victor changed his strategy. He didn't try to convince William. He tried to prevent him. Old investigator invoices had disappeared. Witness statements had been altered. Search requests had been redirected. One retired private investigator finally agreed to meet me. He looked uncomfortable the entire conversation. "I found you once," he admitted. I stared at him. "What?" He nodded. "Almost 15 years ago." The words hit me harder than I expected. "You found me?" He lowered his eyes. I was paid not to tell William. I already knew the answer before I asked. "Victor?" He nodded again. He said William was becoming obsessed. He said revealing your location would destroy important business negotiations. The old me would have become angry. The father I had become simply felt tired. 20 years. 20 years of searching. 20 years of believing life had simply pulled us apart. And all along, someone had been standing in the middle, making sure we never found each other. But Victor's interference hadn't ended there. The financial records revealed something even worse. For years, he had manipulated parts of William's business operations, hidden losses, diverted investments, moved money through shell companies, always small enough to avoid suspicion, always large enough to benefit himself. William had suspected something near the end of his life. That's why he had started reviewing old records. That's why he had renewed the search for me. And that's why, I suddenly realized, Victor had become desperate. He wasn't trying to stop Eleanor from paying a debt. He was trying to stop her from discovering everything else. That night, after Eleanor returned to Whitmore Ranch, I sat alone in my workshop. Emma had already fallen asleep. The old envelope still rested on the workbench. I opened it again. This time, I noticed something I had missed before. The paper felt thicker than it should have. Carefully, I separated the inner lining, and there it was. A second envelope. Hidden, sealed, untouched. Across the front, written in William Whitmore's handwriting, were 7 words that made my hands begin to shake. "If Victor stops you, read this first." The meeting was held at Whitmore Ranch 3 days later. By the time Emma and I arrived, half the county was already there. Attorneys, board members, employees, business partners, neighbors, reporters, people who had known William Whitmore their entire lives. Everyone had come for the same reason, to hear the final truth. As I walked into the main hall, I saw Eleanor standing at the front of the room. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally. the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying someone else's unfinished business. Victor Kane sat near the center of the room, calm, confident, smiling, the kind of smile men wear when they believe they've already won. I had seen that smile before, many times, back when I wore a badge. Sheriff Harrison nodded toward me as I entered. He already knew, not everything, but enough. The room slowly fell silent. Eleanor stepped forward, holding the second envelope, the one hidden inside the first, the one Victor never knew existed. She looked around the room. Then she looked at me. My father left this letter to be opened only if someone tried to stop his final instructions from being carried out. For the first time all morning, Victor stopped smiling. Eleanor broke the seal and began to read. The room became so quiet that I could hear the old ceiling fans turning overhead. My name is William Whitmore. If you are hearing these words, then I have already failed to do what I should have done many years ago. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Eleanor continued. 20 years ago, Jacob Miller saved my life. I closed my eyes. For a moment I was back in that storm, back in the flood, back carrying a man I had believed would die. She continued reading. Jacob Miller saved my life when he had every reason to walk away. He was young. He was poor. He owed me nothing. But he chose to save me anyway. I saw several people wipe tears from their eyes. Even Sheriff Harrison lowered his head. Then Eleanor read the next sentence, the sentence that changed everything. If I die before paying this debt, you must do it for me. The room remained silent, but William wasn't finished. I searched for Jacob for 20 years. I hired investigators. I followed rumors. I traveled across Texas, and every time I got close, someone stopped me. Slowly, Eleanor lowered the paper, then looked directly at Victor. I don't think he breathed. She continued. That person was Victor Kane. The silence became unbearable. William's words cut through the room. For years, I trusted Victor. For years, he assured me that every search had failed. For years, I believed fate had prevented me from finding the man who saved my life. I was wrong. The next pages revealed everything: financial records, hidden accounts, manipulated business transactions, destroyed investigation reports, payments to private investigators, bribes, forgery, fraud. Every suspicion William had developed during the final years of his life, every piece of evidence he had gathered, every lie Victor had told. By the time Eleanor finished reading, nobody in the room was looking at me anymore. Everyone was looking at Victor. He stood, then sat back down, then tried to speak, but there was nothing left to say. Sheriff Harrison slowly stood. 2 state investigators stepped forward, and for the first time in 20 years, Victor Kane finally looked afraid. The investigation was announced immediately. His business contracts were suspended. His assets were frozen pending review. His access to Whitmore Ranch was permanently revoked. As deputies escorted him from the room, he turned to look at me, not with an anger, with disbelief, because he had spent 20 years trying to bury one act of kindness, and in the end, that single act had destroyed everything he built. The room remained silent after he left. Then Eleanor folded her father's letter, walked toward me, and smiled through tears. My father spent 20 years trying to repay you. She paused, then asked the question everyone in the room wanted answered. Jacob, how much do you want? The room remained silent after Eleanor asked the question, not because people were waiting for an answer, because everyone believed they already knew it. After all, how do you repay a debt that lasted 20 years? With money, land, ownership, power, That was how most people measured value. But as I stood there in the great hall of Whitmore Ranch, looking at Eleanor holding her father's final letter, I realized something. William Whitmore had spent 20 years trying to repay the wrong debt. Eleanor looked at me again. Her voice trembled. "Jacob, how much did my father owe you?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I turned. Emma sat beside Noah near the back of the room. The two of them were whispering to each other, smiling, completely unaware that every adult in the room was waiting for a number, a price, a transaction. I smiled. Then I looked back at Eleanor. He already paid me. For the first time all afternoon, she looked confused. "What?" I walked slowly toward the window overlooking the pastures, the same fields where William Whitmore had spent his life, building something larger than himself. "I saved your father because he needed help." I paused. I never expected anything in return. She shook her head. "But he spent 20 years trying to find you." I smiled. "Then maybe he spent 20 years teaching himself the same lesson he taught me." The room remained silent. I continued. "Your father showed me something that night. He showed me that helping someone is never a transaction. It's a choice." I looked down at my hands. Hands that had repaired fences, raised Emma, carried Sarah's casket, and once, long ago, pulled a man out of a storm. I didn't save William Whitmore because I wanted money. I saved him because leaving him there would have changed who I was. Several people quietly lowered their eyes. Eleanor's tears finally fell. "But he wanted to repay you." I nodded. "I know." She took a deep breath. "The Whitmore estate is prepared to transfer any amount you believe is fair." I smiled. "No." She looked shocked. "The ranch can provide land." "No." "Ownership shares." "No." "A partnership." I laughed softly. "Definitely no." A few people in the room actually smiled. For the first time since her father died, Eleanor laughed through her tears. "Then what do I tell him?" The question caught me off guard, not because William could hear her, because I knew she still spoke to him. Sometimes grief doesn't disappear. It simply changes the way we continue loving someone. I looked out toward the fields. The sun was beginning to set. Then I answered, "Tell him he already paid his debt." "How?" I smiled. "By spending 20 years proving he never forgot." The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was understanding. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Emma and Noah walked together through the Whitmore stables. They fed carrots to the horses, laughed, argued about which horse ran faster, and somehow acted as though none of the pain, loss, secrets, or regrets of the adults around them had ever existed. Maybe that's why children are sometimes wiser than we are. The sunset spread across the Texas sky. Gold, orange, red. I stood beside Eleanor near the fence. Neither of us spoke. We simply watched. Watched Emma. Watched Noah. Watched the horses run across the fields William Whitmore had spent his life protecting. And for the first time, I finally understood the debt he had been trying to repay. It had never been about money. It had never been about obligation. It had been about gratitude, about memory, about refusing to let one act of kindness disappear into the past. William Whitmore spent 20 years trying to repay a debt. What he never understood was that kindness was never something I expected to be repaid for. Sometimes the greatest debts aren't measured in money. They're measured in the lives we change. If someone saved your life years ago, would you spend the rest of your life trying to repay that debt? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about honor, family, second chances, and cowboys who never give up, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story.